everyone. My name is Phil Strain, and your name is?
I'm Rosemarie Allen.
And we're both with the National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations. And we are, in one sense, delighted to be here to share some ideas, admittedly, mostly Rosemarie's ideas, about the conversations that parents are having, thinking of having, are really nervous about having with their children around the murder of Mr. Floyd, the events that have occurred since then. And so it's fair to say that we also have mixed feelings about being here, because we're here because of not just the tragedy of his death for him and his family and his loved ones, but for a whole accumulation of deaths, as a matter of fact. So there's unquestionable momentum in the country about parents having conversations with their children around race, around violence, around the police. And for most white families, this is a new conversation. But I think it's important for us to start off to put all of these conversations in some context, some time context in particular, because Rosemarie, as you know, this is not a new conversation for African-American families. So if you could start off by just telling us a bit about the ongoing historical conversations that African-American families have had with their young children around race.
Thank you, Phil. And I just want to applaud people for coming here and being willing to have these conversations. And as you said, African-Americans and people of color, families of color, we have to have these conversations while our children are very young, and we have to have them very often. And they evolve over time. Black parents have to decide when to break their children's hearts, because as all children are, they're born with this natural curiosity, and they love everyone, and they believe the world is a really, really good place. But we have to prepare our children to live in a racial society, in a racial environment where the color of their skin can often become a target. It can cause them to become a target. So our job as parents is to make sure we prepare children for that. And we have found that when you talk to children about race and you promote their racial identity in a very positive way, they're less likely to internalize the discrimination that they experience. So beginning at age 3, sometimes a little bit earlier, we began to talk about race, the color of skin, the differences between people. I remember when my son came home, a little younger than 3, and he goes, "How come everybody at school has yellow hair and blue eyes and I don't?" Because children notice differences. And the very casual response was, "Well, I'm your mom and dad's your dad, and we have brown skin and brown eyes. And because we're your mom and dad, you have brown skin and brown eyes because you came from us." And that was just enough for him. But as he became older, as he matured, we had to talk about how some people treat people differently because of the color of their skin. And we want you to know that some people will do that. And these are the things that you can say, and these are the things that you can do. By 4.5, 5 years old, he had to be taught that there are some things that his white friends will be able to do that he won't be able to do. And it was uncanny how often it happened. After that conversation, when other children were climbing the water fountain at the mall, the minute he'd get on it, the security guard would come and tell him to get off. running in a park where other children were running, where his sister was a cheerleader. It was off limits, but all the kids played there. The minute he went down and played there, he was reprimanded. And then we had to tell him, this has nothing to do with you. But remember, we had the talk that people will treat you differently because of the color of your skin. So yes, Phil, we had to have those conversations early and often. I just talked to a Facebook friend and she made a post. She said, I'm trying to figure out when to break my son's heart because he loves police officers. And I'll have to let him know that they won't all love him. So it's heartbreaking, but necessary.
Yeah. You know, I love the story that you just told about your son coming home from school and commenting on the color, the skin color and the hair color, eye color of his classmates. And it reminds me of this, let me just say, this kind of line, if you will, this theme that gets parroted by, I guess we'll say, neoliberals and other people that, oh, I don't see color. I just like focus on character. Talk to us, if you will, about that comment and how people of color hear that.
Well, first, it's very offensive because if you don't see color, you don't see me. And if you don't see me, then we cannot connect because then you don't understand my experiences living in this country, especially because it's not true. We see race. We see the color of people's skin. The minute you meet me, you know that I'm a Black woman. So why not acknowledge that you see that? It's perfectly okay to see me as a Black woman. It's not okay to treat me negatively or differently because of it. But when you see me, it makes me visible. One of the biggest problems, especially for Black women in this society, is the invisibility. Either we're very, very visible or totally invisible. So to say that you don't see race, you just see people means that you are totally diminishing other people's experiences in this country.
Thank you, Rosemarie. Kind of do a follow up on this theme that we've started on, and that's the conversations that people of color have historically had with their children, and it stimulates another thought in my mind that I know that you have done research on and other people have done research on, and it centers around this notion that the insults to people of color are not just contemporaneous things that happen, but there's an actual intergenerational piece to this. Kind of, if you will, inheriting a history of discrimination and devaluing. I can't put myself in that position. I don't know how that feels. I can speculate that it makes it extra hard on adult parents of color to have conversations with their kids, because it seems like there's a risk of bringing up all kinds of historical traumatic events in the recent past, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, but also what happened to your grandmother.
Absolutely. And Phil, I appreciate you bringing this up, and it's the historical and generational racial trauma. And that it's very evident what has happened, especially to African Americans in this country, but we don't always talk about the racial trauma of whites, and we'll get into that in a second. But for African Americans, people don't like to think about the legacy of slavery as if it's over, we're done with that. Just why do we have to keep talking about it? We have to keep talking about it because the trauma has never healed or gone away. So I am descendants of slaves. And from slavery came the Reconstruction period. From that period became the Jim Crow era. My grandparents lived in the Jim Crow era. Believe it or not, my husband lived in the segregated South. So I saw my grandparents, or heard stories, I should say, of my grandparents during that era. And I know that my grandfather was called the N-word in front of his baby girl, who was my mother. And he hit the guy. He actually beat him up for calling him that word. And he said it was because he had to defend his manhood in front of his daughter. But what happened was that they had to get him out of town, out of Shreveport, Louisiana, before sundown, because they knew without a doubt that he would have been lynched that evening. So he escaped from Los Angeles. Escaped from the South and came to Los Angeles. So he fought the Jim Crow era. He escaped the terrorism of the South. And then he came to the discrimination of the North, where he had a very, very hard time making a living. Although he was a crafted shoemaker, he eventually found his way because he opened his own business. And then he still had to fight the discrimination. And he had a daughter with special needs. So now that intersectionality, being Black, having a daughter with special needs and fighting for her rights. And my grandmother was an amazing activist for my mother, who was her daughter. And then here I come, and I'm fighting in the Black Power movement. I'm walking with people who are now fighting against the same system of injustice. And then comes my son, who was on the front lines in Baltimore and Ferguson, and right here with the protest today. So this fight has never ended. The trauma has never healed. So it's ongoing. And more recently, and it could be because of social media, or it could be that it's actually worse, but we have no time to heal one murder before another one happens. Look at what happened just in a 2-week period. Look at the Black men who were killed, the Black woman who was killed, the Mr. Cooper in the park with Amy Cooper threatening to call the police, saying an African-American male was threatening my life. That's almost attempted murder, because you know what happens to Black men at the hands of police officers, especially if you're a helpless white woman screaming for your life. So we haven't had a chance to heal at all. So these conversations are ongoing. They're extremely emotional. My son asked me one time, why am I fighting this fight when you fought it? When Dad fought it? When Granddaddy fought it? Mom, why am I still fighting it? And it's a very difficult conversation to have. And not only that, but while we have to continue these fights, when I said white people don't think about the historical trauma, racial trauma either, when we think about 1619 and the Europeans that came over and the trauma they experienced in England, the harsh discipline, the harsh penal system, the hanging and quartering, and coming here to this country and implementing those same things while also enslaving African Americans. And then after enslavement, then you have the slave patrols that evolved into the police departments. And then you have the KKK, who have totally infiltrated police departments. So there's also a lot of racial trauma there that we don't always talk about. And we've come to a point, Phil, where we have to talk about this. You know, when we wonder why South Africa is healing, it's because they had the truth and reconciliation process where they talked about it and put it on the table and talked about their truths, and then reconciled and talk about how we heal from this. And we've not had that conversation.
Yeah, and I love the analogy to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. While you were talking, just before you mentioned that, as I was listening to you and hearing the emotion in your voice, it touched me, and it made me think. I wonder if the conversations that could be just as valuable as having parents of color talk to their children versus white parents talk to their children if there might be opportunities for folks to talk across racial lines.
Mhm.
Wouldn't that be a remarkable educational experience? It seems to me, as a white person, I can't well educate my white child about the Black racial experience.
Mhm.
But I might be able to rely on friends and colleagues and whomever to help fill in that gap. Does that make any sense at all as a strategy?
Oh, it makes all the sense in the world, Phil. I've been told by the white families of my children what a difference it made for them to share our stories. For instance, another conversation we have to have with our children is store behavior, retail behavior. We have to tell them that they never leave the store without a bag and a receipt. And especially as receipts went digital, you tell them to print out a receipt and you put everything in a bag. If you're returning something to the store, you don't walk around the store with that return item. You go to the front, you say, I have a return. Even if the cashier says, it's okay, just shop and we'll settle it later, say, no, ma'am, I need a bag for this. And I'd like you to hold it at the front because we know what can happen. Just recently with me, I went to buy a very expensive vacuum cleaner. I know the people, I knew the salesman. And he said, don't worry about it. I rang you up and I've emailed you a receipt. I said, Alec, I can't walk out of this store without a receipt with a $600 vacuum. He goes, well, why not? I said, do you think they'll believe me as a Black woman said, oh, I paid for it, just ask Alec. And he was shocked. He said, oh, I'll walk out with you. So when my children go to the store with their friends and they're saying, man, I need a receipt. Oh no, I can't walk out without a bag. That child then tells the mother, and the mother is now enlightened. And it opens the door to have these conversations in saying, I had no idea. That's something I never thought about. What other conversations are you having with your child that we can reinforce? But to be honest with you, Phil, Black families, I was really shocked that white families didn't have similar conversations with their children. That was an eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, let me ask you another question, if I could, Rosemarie. And it sounds in my head as I'm thinking about it a simple question, but I'm guessing the answer's not. But that remains to be seen shortly. So, if there were two or three key things that you had to kind of boil the essence of an effective conversation down to, what two or three pieces of advice would you provide to families about when and where and how to have conversations with their young children?
The first thing I would say is, as the parent, you have to develop comfort in talking about race. You have to be very comfortable with it, and then you can have the conversation with your child. When you're uneasy or you don't know what to say or you're afraid of offending or you're very reluctant, children will pick up on that. If it's an older child, you can be honest. You can say, we've not had this conversation. I was raised not to talk about these issues, so I am a little uncomfortable, but I want to make sure that when you grow up, you're not as uncomfortable as I am. But for younger children, try to develop that comfort, and you want to do it before incidents such as these occur. And it happens very early with just allowing children to notice difference. I shared a story about being in a supermarket. I'm in a supermarket, I'm rounding the aisle, a child is coming towards me, we almost crash into each other. And he steps back and said, hey, you're Black. And I said, yes, I am, and you're white. Let me see. And you have blue eyes. I don't have blue eyes, my eyes are brown. He goes, well, my eyes are blue. And by that time, his mom came up and the conversation ended. And to be honest with you, I was very happy his mother lagged behind because I suspect she would have shushed him. So once you develop a comfort with race, don't silence your children when they acknowledge difference. Go with it. When he said, "Hey, you're Black," he was just noticing that I was Black. It's not offensive to people when that happens. But say, "Yes, they are Black. And look, you're white. Look at your skin. Look at my skin. What color would you say? You're kind of pinkish. She's kind of caramel." And just talk about it very casually. So that's the first thing, is to be comfortable with it. And then the second thing, and this is a hard one, is to help children understand that there are some people in the world who will treat children unfairly just because the color of their skin is different. And to have those conversations and to talk about it. And you know what? You'd be surprised that your child already knows and have already experienced it. And the next step is to talk about how we intervene when we see injustices. Studies show that by 4 and 5 years old, white children fail to intervene when they see injustices against Black children. But what if we started having that conversation earlier? And we can create a social justice classroom where everyone can thrive. Now, one of the most important things, Phil, is that we teach children to empathize, but not sympathize. We don't want children to feel sorry for their friends of color because that places them in a superior role. We want to teach them that everyone deserves to be treated fairly.
Yeah, oh, that's great advice. Could I just touch on one small piece about the elements of the pyramid model
Yes.
and the role of those within having these conversations? So what I'm thinking of specifically is I worry a little bit about young children and their bombardment with visual images and auditory images and the strong emotions that they may engender in children. Not negative emotions necessarily, just strong emotions. I wonder, are there direct applications in pyramid concepts around emotional literacy, for example, or being able to track your feelings and the fact that they can change from moment to moment and circumstances to other circumstances? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, the beauty of the pyramid model is that it really teaches children to be aware of how they're feeling. It labels those feelings, and then it teaches children how to respond to those feelings. Because right now, children are feeling all the feels, as my daughter would say, and everything they're feeling is okay. So how do we help children make sense of that? And I'm just thinking of some of the pyramid model strategies that I've seen in practice that I'm aware of. For instance, if you have a feelings chart when a child walks in the classroom in the next day or two or a week or two, and you notice that they're saying they're feeling anxious, they're feeling sad, they're feeling angry, is to really spend some time to follow up on those feelings, to talk about why you're feeling this way, and then to talk about what you can do about it. And even during your group time is to talk about how we can support each other as we feel sad. And Phil, as you were talking, I was just thinking even about solution cards, because as you said, these feelings will go in and out and up and down, and they can walk in happy and get sad. They can be triggered. There's a lot they're being bombarded with right now. But our solutions cards are amazing, you know, that it doesn't have to be just, they don't have to be used just when there's a problem, but they can be used just when you're feeling sad or when you need support. So we can tell children that, you know, you might go through the day and you might feel really scared because there's a lot going on. And let's look at our solution card and see. And you can tell a teacher, You can get a friend. I mean, there are certain things even there that we can use. We have the tools within our model, within the pyramid model, to help children through this process. It does require us to think a little bit differently about how we help children to regulate their emotions. And that difference is how the adults respond to it. Because you might be very fearful that I don't want to talk about Mr. Floyd. I don't want them to see the images of the police officer on his neck. These things are too big for young children. But we have to assume that many of them have seen it. I've not personally watched the film. It's too much for me, but I've seen enough snippets of it to put together what happened, of course, in hearing things. But just like me, children are seeing little snippets. So they may have strong reactions, and we just have to be prepared. But on top of everything else is to know that when using the pyramid model, you have the tools to address this.
Well, Rosemarie, this has been a wonderful opportunity for me to educate myself. My thoughts have been expanded as well as my heart, and so I want to thank you and give you the opportunity to express to folks watching us any final thoughts that you might want to share around the importance of families talking with each other about race.
Absolutely. My final thought here is a sign that I saw recently, and it said, "We cannot teach Black children and be silent towards the injustices that they face." And we teach Black children in communities of color. So as we deal with racism in our society, and we all know it's there, we have a responsibility to talk through these issues so that we can create a safe environment for everyone. When we fail to talk about race, then children fill in the blanks with their own ideas. So we want to make sure that we're shaping those conversations so that we can have the best outcome for all children.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to be with you. You never disappoint, and you're always inspiring. So thanks once again.
Thank you, and thank you, Phil, and the Pyramid Model team for broaching these difficult topics. We're changing the world.
Take care, everybody.